Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, over the last 24 hours, a lot of noise between the USC and Oregon fans, obviously stemming from some recruiting news we got late Friday night. Jonas Williams flipping his commitment from Oregon to USC. Before we get into this conversation about where these two programs are and where these two programs are going, Dill, I just want to start with this. You want to know what makes college football the best sport on the planet. You got USC and Oregon fans in the middle of February on a Friday night just getting after it on social media, on the message boards, knowing dang well, we ain't playing a snap of football for the next 6 months. This is what I appreciate the most about the sport of college football. And to the USC and Oregon fans, let it fly in the comment section. This is the beauty of the sport, and this is the beauty of talking about the college football landscape in the month of February. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. To the USC and Oregon fans, y'all know we love talking both of these programs. We appreciate the heck out of you guys supporting the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Dill, to me, you talk about who runs the West Coast right now. And let's just be very clear about it. USC and Oregon, these are the two programs that we would expect to run the West Coast of college football, right? Obviously coming into the Big Ten, but still West Coast presences. Where I want to start here, Dill, is that Dan Lanning in Oregon just seem to be a little bit ahead of USC in terms of what they're trying to do. But what excites me the most about USC right now is they are starting to operate like a powerhouse in college football once again. Where when Lincoln Riley took over at USC, obviously Caleb Williams came over and they won a lot of football games, especially in year one. But what they were doing on the recruiting trail, what they were doing in terms of a staffing department, both the front office and the coaching staff, clearly was not good enough. Oregon, there's no question about it, is at the top of the college football landscape right now. I look at this USC team, and what excites me is, one, they are starting to operate like a powerhouse in college football once again, spending big time money. I'm bringing in an elite front office, really good defensive coaching staff now compared to where it was 2 years ago. I want to start looking at these two teams from a recruiting perspective first, and this is probably the biggest difference between these two programs as we speak right now. Now, the good thing for the USC and Oregon fans, you look up at Oregon's class in 2026, it's early, number one class in the country. You look at USC, it's early, but 2026 high school recruiting rankings, number 2 team in the country. Those are how those numbers should look for both of those programs. Dill, what have you seen on the recruiting trail and kind of largely just roster building from both of these programs over the last couple of years?
I mean, it probably starts. You just think of who's winning the territorial war, if you will,
That's
on the West Coast. Oregon's dominated it.
agreed.
Like they go into Southern
California.
California, but also California as a whole, and pretty much take who they want. And that has been, I think, a huge issue of why USC has struggled so much. Is you see them like, yeah, they'll land commitments, like big commitments too, from guys across the country. But again, when it talks to like kind of finalizing their classes, it doesn't feel like these classes have stuck together, obviously, for USC. And I think a part of that is not really being able to defend your backyard at all. And Lincoln Riley's talked about it feels like, for the last couple of years. But really, before this year, it doesn't really feel like he's made a real aggressive push to dominate the state of California. That certainly feels like where it started between these two schools.
That's probably what I would say too. I mean, you look at Oregon's roster, you go top to bottom with this roster and say that there's a lot of California talent that are going to be difference makers for the Oregon Ducks in the 2025 year. And look, this is, if I'm a USC fan, this is what excites me the most. Is in 2026, there is a clear shift of focus in terms of where USC wants to build their roster from. It's the state of California. And if you're a USC fan, this is how it should look. We've talked about it a ton over the last couple of months. The number 2 thing that I'll point out, and again, you look at the class rankings, Oregon has had better classes, right? 2024, they had the number 4 recruiting class in the country. 2025, they signed the number 2 recruiting class in the country. USC in both of those years has been outside the top 15. The second thing I'll say in terms of the recruiting efforts, Oregon's done a better job on the line of scrimmage. Dill, I went back the last 3 recruiting cycles. Oregon, 22 blue chip line of scrimmage players. USC, 9. You talk about, especially as you go into the Big Ten, and we talk about this concept all the time as well. Look, if you want to have good line of scrimmage play, you have to get those bodies out of the high school ranks. what fires you up if you're a USC fan is though you look at how that 2025 class finished and take an early look at the 2026 class. We know Chad Bowden is going to be really emphasizing the line of scrimmage out of the high school ranks. To kind of summarize this conversation, Dill, Oregon just seems to have a better head start. Dan Lanning got to Eugene, got the program recruiting where he wanted it to. And Lincoln Riley, it took a few years. And if you're a USC fan, I think this is going to make or break Lincoln Riley's tenures. Hey, can you get USC back to recruiting the talent that is necessary to be a powerhouse in college football? Because USC fans don't need to hear this. Outside of the top 15 in consecutive years, that's not going to cut it. Number two, the coaching staff. This is another thing that I think Dan Lanning got right earlier, but I think Lincoln Riley has right going into 2025. When you look at USC coming in, Alex Grinch and Dill, what I think just killed Lincoln Riley early in his tenure is sticking with Alex Grinch for year two. And it was like, okay, you won 11 games, so it's like nobody was really banging the table. Well, USC fans were banging the table for Alex Grinch, but Lincoln Riley stuck with him. And that defensive just collapse that we saw in the 2024 year, I think that hurt USC on the recruiting trail as well. And when you have a coaching staff that just looks as inept as it was, it's hard to convince kids to come play for your program. If you're a USC fan, you look at this new coaching staff. Dan Lynn, I think, is one of the best DCs in the country. You look at Coach Henne. You look at a guy like Doug Belk in the secondary. You have a former sitting NFL defensive coordinator coaching your linebackers and Rob Ryan. To me, Dan Lanning got it right early and made some really good hires as the last couple of years have gone on. It took Lincoln Riley a couple of years, but I will say going into 2025, it feels like the coaching staff is where Lincoln Riley wants it going into the 2025.
And probably my only question about the USC staff is their offensive staff. And that might sound a little bit crazy, but I do wonder, is that offensive staff, like you look at Dan Lanning, I mean, he's got really good offensive coordinators, both like Kenny Dillingham and obviously follow it right up with Will Stein, two dynamite hires. He's had Tosh Lupoy now for a while. And obviously Dan Lanning's a defensive guy. I don't know if he's calling the plays. I don't know how exactly that's all split out, but he's no doubt super involved. But he still has a really good defensive coordinator, a guy who's been at really premier programs who I think can recruit and just add, like, again, just coaching talent and depth through that staff. That to me is like, I look at Lincoln Riley, like, are they good enough on the offense side of the ball? I think what he's done on the defensive side and being able to retain Dan Lynn, huge. Obviously, some of the additions, really good additions. I do wonder, top to bottom, is that offensive staff, like, do you look at it and think that's a great offensive staff?
So that's a good question, Dill. I'll say this. As long as Lincoln Riley's there, I'm not going to be that concerned with the offensive staff. And I will note one thing that you pointed out that I do think has been one of the differences in these two programs. Not only the coordinator hires, Dan Lanning got the position coach, the support staff hires right in a massive way. I mean, you talk about Rashad Samples and what he's done for them on the recruiting trail, and then retaining a guy like Rashad Samples who was getting buzz as he was getting buzzed to be the next head coach, I believe, at Sam Houston down there in Texas. Elite Terry on the offensive line. The list goes on and on. I think the position coaches, they were young, energetic guys that were not only good coaches, but really good on the recruiting trail too. That matters. You talk about recruiting, those position coaches are the ones building the relationships on the trail. Dan Lanning got it right, and again, I think it's coming for Lincoln Riley and USC. Let's get into the main event here, Dale. And we can go pretty quick because, again, I think you look at this conversation, and this conversation is meant to be a little bit more like, look, Oregon is just a little bit of ahead of USC because Dan Lanning, they both got there at the same time. Dan Lanning got some things in order right immediately that Lincoln Riley took a little bit of time to get right. Looking at these two rosters heading into 2025, very early discussion that certainly could change as we go into spring practice and obviously the spring transfer portal. Start at the quarterbacks. Dante Moore, Jaden Mavis / Hassan Longstreet. Who are you taking going into 2025?
Yeah, I probably got to take Dante Moore. And you're going off of two quarterbacks who, again, you've seen relative inconsistency from. I thought, and again, I'm kind of factoring more in as those two are the starters. I certainly realize Hassan Longstreet might be the guy for USC. I think a lot of USC fans wouldn't necessarily mind seeing that. But looking right now in terms of the top end proven guy, I would probably take Dante Moore just because, again, he was a true freshman, had some mistakes, but there is some undeniable talent. And I do think like in a tough situation where he had to do a lot for that a really weak UCLA team around him, I'm kind of encouraged that he might be really special.
The to me, I also give the lean to Dante Moore. That might make some USC fans mad. And one of the things that does I just don't agree with is like Dante Moore stinks because he wasn't good as a freshman. Like name me a true freshman, Dill, that would have went into UCLA and yeah, maybe Caleb Williams. That's fair, USC fans. Maybe Caleb Williams would have figured it out there. But there's just not a lot of freshmen that would have had success at that UCLA offense in 2023. The offensive line stunk. The pass catchers were not good enough. Dante Moore was he was just ahead of his skis as a freshman. And now Dante Moore with the year to develop under Dylan Gabriel, now coming into an offense that I think has a significantly better offensive line, significantly better pass catchers. I really do think you're going to see a different version of Dante Moore. And he was a kid that I just loved coming out of high school as well. The running back position, I think you probably have to give the lean to Oregon as well here. And I'm a fan of Brian Jackson, but Mekhi Hughes right now is just a little bit more of a known commodity. Like with back-to-back 1,000 yards at Tulane, the numbers are – the advanced analytics on Mekhi Hughes are absolutely off the charts in terms of missed tackles forced, in terms of yards after contact. This is the interesting conversation, though. And this is where you're going to get a lot of heat in the comment section, whatever way you go. Wide receiver room heading into 2025. Who are you taking?
I think you got to take the Trojans. I look at the Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon tandem. I love Evan Stewart, big fan of what he can do. But aside from him, you kind of want rocking with relative unknowns for the most part and talented kids. Obviously,
yeah, super talented.
Will recruit good players at the wideout spots. But man, Xavier Jordan, like he doesn't take a backseat in talent to a ton of guys either. So I think you have two guys who are just would be right up there with the best wide receiver on that Oregon team. I think just in terms of your two proven horses, you gotta go.
That's probably the right way to. And I don't like to sit on the fence either, but that's probably the right way to say it. Is USC you have more proven commodities, right? Yeah, Evan Stewart's really the only, and you have a guy like Gary Bryant, but we haven't seen him over the last couple of years, or at least the last year. Evan Stewart's really the only one proven guy. You have, and Dill, I am just such a big fan of Mekhi Lemon. I think he's one of the most underrated wide receivers in the country. He's not like the biggest. He's not the fastest, although he's pretty damn fast. But, man, as like a route runner, as a separator, never drops balls, yards after the catch. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in the country going into 2025. I am also going to lean wide receiver here. Tight end real quick. I just want to give a shout out to my guy, Kenny Sadiq. I think he is going to be maybe the best tight end in the country as we go into 2025. Offensive line. I also think this one is pretty clear. You got to lean with Oregon here. Just more answers. I think if you're a USC fan, look, that you just have question marks about that right tackle spot, in my opinion. And for Oregon, you don't really have a ton of question marks. You know that, one, Isaiah Ward's a dog. Alex Harkey's very, very solid. If you can figure out the right tackle spot for USC, you feel pretty good about this offensive line, but you got to figure it out. And I would say Oregon's offensive line from a depth standpoint is probably better as well.
Yeah, you probably can't argue that now. And also not just from a depth standpoint, but top end talent. I look like there's some guys on Oregon who I think can be really good players.
Who are you taking, Isaiah Ward or Elijah Page?
This year, probably Isaiah World. Elijah Page, though, is a guy like he didn't have a super consistent season, probably a little disappointing last year. Cleaned it up towards the end and started to play really good football, but really kind of rocky start for him. I think you'd take Isaiah World now, but yeah, Elijah Page is obviously going in the right direction. And like if he plays like what he did the last couple of games of the year, all year,
that month in November for Elijah Page was elite. Like I've gone back and watched that, and he was dynamite. If you get that version of Elijah Page, I'm taking Elijah Page, but you're probably right saying maybe Isaiah Ward a little bit more like consistent over the course of 3 month season.
But then it's like you look across like Pregnon, you probably took their best offensive lineman if you're Oregon. You look at what like that move is. I think Poncho's a really, really good center. I'm interested to see what Alex Harkey can do because he's a guy I almost think you didn't give the proper flowers to. Like,
Really?
probably not an NFL offensive tackle because he's not the fleetest of foot, but big, strong guy, does a really good job at the college level. I think he's going to
Yeah.
do a really good job.
And this is kind of the result of what you've seen when we went back to recruiting. Line of scrimmage, Oregon's just won a lot of those battles on the line of scrimmage for guys, and obviously they've used the transfer portal pretty damn well to build this offensive line as well. Defensive line.
Oh,
You going to Oregon?
yeah. I'm not as big of a defense. I need to see it from everyone on this USC defensive line because there is not one guy, in my opinion, frankly, who you've seen play particularly great football. Like exciting players like Carlin Jones, G-Day, Devin Tompkins, I thought did play solid ball last year. And then the two guys up front with Keyshawn and Ja, like, yeah, they're interesting players, but you have not seen particularly good football from
Keyshawn, I think you have. The rest are, because Jamal Jarrett didn't really play a ton at Georgia. Devin Tompkins was low-key going in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'm with you from kind of the same conversation we had with the wide receivers. Like you just kind of know a little bit more about the Oregon defensive line than you do USC. I will say this: don't sleep on this USC defensive line because it's significantly deeper, it's significantly bigger, and I'm a big fan of these edge rushers too. Like Anthony Lucas, I think would have had a great season if he stayed healthy. Cam Fountain, as a true freshman in the month of November, was very, very good, and I'm high on Braylon Shelby as well. You have to go Oregon probably because of the proven commodities.
But Oregon, frankly, they got their questions too. Because like Bear Alexander, even like, how do you call him or where do you throw him as a proven commodity, if you will? Because it's a tough one to judge for me as well. Like Amari Washington, I'm a huge fan of him. I think he's kind of been on the right
I
path
like it too.
through his whole college career. So like his game, you obviously like the young guys like Breland and Jericho Johnson.
But you don't. But the same conversation you had with USC, like you haven't really seen them.
Because when I said proven, I go look at the Oregon depth chart. I'm like, oh, well, that's not wildly proven in its own right, especially
so
on the inside.
Yeah, so to me, I think you got solid players, especially in Amari Washington. Now it's like Aiden Breland. And this is the conversation. Like the USC fans will say, hey, Dan Lanning doesn't develop talent. Well, this is the year that I think Dan Lanning, like, hey, Aiden Breland, Jericho Johnson, Tyone Gray, some of those guys got to be those guys.
I will say I do significantly favor the defensive end room of Oregon. I think that's
Tatum and Mateo are done. Yeah, I agree, and I like the edge rushers for USC, but Tatum and Mateo, but it's hard to both of those guys are only going into year 3.
Yeah, they're coming on.
They've been playing a lot of football.
Purchase is good too, I think. So
yeah, you're Blake Purchase guy more than me. I'm most interested in Elijah Rushing. If we're going to get into the weeds of this Oregon depth chart here, linebacker, I got massive question marks about USC's depth. It's like Eric Gentry, Desmond Stevens, and it gets hairy, right? Eric Gentry's the best linebacker on the football field, in my opinion. Whoa, who are you going to argue for? Bryce?
I do like Betcher. No, you're probably right. You'd probably take Eric Gentry, but Betcher and Devin Johnson or Devin Jackson, I should say, as a whole, I would probably take.
I think if you're just talking about the two starters, like I'm high on Desmond Stevens going into year 2, and I think the world of Eric Gentry, especially with Dan Lanning, Eric Gentry was one of the best linebackers in the country, if not the best before he got hurt.
Playing good ball for sure last year.
Secondary to me is you have to get this Oregon. Like I don't know what it's going to look like, Dill, but I'm very comfortable betting on just it's a blue chip city. Pretty much every Oregon member of this secondary was a top 200 national prospect. And then you supplement it with a guy like Dylan Tiemann at the safety spot. USC's got some young guys too, and return a guy like Kamari Ramsey, who I think so. You talk about Dylan Tiemann being one of the best safeties in the country. Kamari Ramsey is that guy too. But just from a pure depth standpoint, dude, this Oregon secondary is absolutely loaded to the gills. And it's hard for me. Yes, I don't know what it's going to look like. It's the most impossible position group to determine what's the starting lineup going to be. But holy smokes, it's too loaded not to go with. All right, we'll pause it there. This is going to be Dill in 2 to 3 years.
I was going to say, like this year, you probably got to give the edge to Oregon. But USC, if they can stay on the track they're on, and even just Lincoln Riley, like, I don't know. I listened to that On3 interview. I'm like, he does feel a little bit different. Like, he's like getting a little pissed off, if you will, at some of the results. It feels a little more fiery than maybe.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was like, oh, well, we're fine. We're coming. It's like, you're not coming.
The best way to describe it probably is, look, Oregon, since Dan Lanning has gotten there, has been operating like a powerhouse in college football. USC just had it when Lincoln Riley got there. And now it just seems like things are coming together. And look, I ain't saying Dan Lanning and Oregon are going out nowhere, but I think USC is going in the right direction.
They'll tighten it up.
The Big Ten, as Michigan fans, Big Ten's going in the right direction, baby. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. USC Oregon fans, let it fly. Some off-season talk. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.